So, I love AI. I love it.
Right.
I'm a huge fan of everything that's happening in AI, even the good, even the bad, even the average. I love everything that's going on with AI. I love the ability that it's going to give us to be more human. I know some people are going to hear them be like, what? AI makes us more human? Yes. Maybe we'll get a chance to explain my theory on that as we move forward. But I think for the first time today, I've always seen the negative sides of AI. I know the bad. I know all the bad that people see. Before anything good gets a chance to get its legs underneath it, everybody runs with all of the bad stuff that's going to happen from it. And I'm like, wait. Why don't you guys think, how do we glorify God with this first, and then understand how we guard the things that we're making to glorify God with? Like, how do we do that? Let's create that. I think that functional process of thinking gets you further along and creates more human flourishing, which is what I'm after, which is why I love AI, because of the human flourishing side that I see. AI for me levels the playing field in a lot of ways. It gives people the ability to have technology to do commerce and to operate in a way that they wouldn't have before, in the same way a cell phone had, in the same way cars have, in the same way airplanes. It's funny. I remember growing up, if you jumped on an airplane or went on an airplane, you were rich.
Right.
Like, you had money because you could just, you went on a flight. I still remember my first flight as a kid. It was an hour long going from Minneapolis to Kansas City. And I couldn't believe, like, we got money. We didn't have any money. It was still an expensive flight. But I mean, so I remember, so technology has always advanced human flourishing. It always has, right? In every way, in every aspect. And there's always bad sides to it. But right now, the thing that has me contemplating AI, not to get rid of it, but contemplating the effects of it, is the fact that I think it might be the most disruptive piece of technology for us as it relates to reality. I don't know in this current moment, if it was 20 years ago, maybe not, but in this current moment, I don't think there's a more disruptive tool to the human situation as it currently is than AI, because I was looking at this new runway that they just got done making. I think it's Runway. And then there's another one. There's a couple different AIs. Sora has been huge on this. A lot of pictures coming out. For the first time, there is like this 98 or 99.3% human looking image and video where you really can't tell the difference. They finally got the hands right. The only way that you know this is not a real picture is by looking at the text on his lanyard. And when you look at his text on the lanyard, the text reads like it's Russian or something.
Right.
And if you're Russian, you're looking at it and you're like, that's not Russian. And so there really is an identifiable way with the human eye to know if that's not a real person, if that's not a real picture, if that's not real. And for the first time, it's not like that stuff hasn't troubled me. It's troubled me a little bit, but I think I begin to see in the context of our current moment why that's a problem.
Yeah.
Because the very nature of human reality is up for grabs right now. And it's not
Right,
that, yeah, go ahead.
The imagination
Yes.
is when you have as many undisciplined imaginations as we have around,
Yes.
then AI is dangerous.
And I got a taste of that just looking at the image. I didn't become like afraid, like, oh, they're going to take her. I wasn't worried about that. I was worried about the fact that here's how my head thought, and I'm just going to be just straight out open. I don't even know where this is going to go. My head thought, oh my goodness, I wish they didn't put as much makeup on women like they did. Right. And I'm gonna tell you, this is what I thought. Oh my goodness, I wish that they didn't overdress women and make them more scantily like they did. I wish that they didn't do breast what do they call? Where they manipulate the breast to make them larger. You know, I wish they didn't get BBLs. I got really upset because the manipulation of the woman, to me, drove out an idea that wasn't real in how she did her makeup, and or should I say how they did her makeup. And I think it's a lot of gay dudes, the homosexual movement, how the fact that they over exaggerated the beauty of, not over exaggerated, they manipulated and made an unreal version of a woman. I think you can see this even in Barbie. And they just kept adding on to this fakeness of a woman, that the idea of if that really even was a woman, became to play in how we view women. We used to know that a guy in a dress wasn't a woman. That was very easy to tell. But the way that we've manipulated the image of a woman so much that even a guy, if he goes and gets some sort of butt thing done, and he goes and puts some big breast on, and then now it makes it look like his waist is super small, you can't, you have to say, let me see your Adam's apple. And now they're doing stuff for that, right? Like there was on Instagram, there was a guy who was dressing up, putting full makeup on like a woman. You wouldn't have been able to tell any difference whatsoever. And he's tricking younger boys because he's dressing up like an anime character, a female anime character. And he's tricking younger teenage boys who are like, wow, look at this shocking. And some of them are kind of like, something ain't quite right, but it sounds like a girl, looks like what I think a girl's supposed to look like. Like, okay, I'm interested. And then all of a sudden he drops his voice.
Yeah.
And they're like, whoa. And they'll be like, whoa, what's going on? But the reason that he can get so far is because of how we've manipulated the look and the beauty of a woman and marred it so much that this other supposed image of what we think a woman is, that can be faked. You know? And so,
right.
And so as I'm looking at AI and I'm looking at it, I was like, our eyes have been deceived so much going up into this moment that the ability for AI to deceive us, we're primed for it. We're ready for it, right? And I don't think it's just with the image of woman. I think with guys too, but primarily women. I think that that was the adorning of a woman went so far over the top in her how they dressed her, how they did her makeup. You've seen, dude, you can almost go and you can see a whole pile of the armor of a woman next to her on a bedstead, right? Her hair, her eyelashes, all the stuff it takes to reshape her face to look a particular type of way. People wouldn't recognize some of these women without makeup on at all. Like, we don't even know, wow, that's you? I had no idea that was you.
But I think, though, the reason that can even happen is because we already don't value the glory of femininity.
I agree. I totally agree.
And men tend to be much more visual, and so they're easier to trick that way. So I don't think I think we're gonna have to learn to trust the instincts of women again when it comes to things like, is that a dude or not? Because you look at the way, I saw something really funny. It was a guy doing an interview, and it was this, conference. It's space where all these women were gathered in support of trans rights, and so he was just going around and saying,
I saw that.
Yeah, you look a lot like Dylan Mulvaney. You really. And they were all taking it as an insult. I was like, yeah, no, I don't. Which was really, which was a really good. It's a really good joke, but it's also a really good point, right? Is that it's all play acting, right? And that's something that I think we need to. That you can only get through by actually learning to honor the real glory of women.
But is that something that I think that might actually be, that's not just to understand the difference between a man and a woman. I think that's important, but I think it's dealing with the very nature of what's real and what's not real. Because when I'm looking at AI, we don't have any anchor points for what's real and what's not real anymore. I mean, Hollywood has helped completely destroy those. Dude, I'm going to my theories now for all the bag. They have been, the CIA and the government has been in cahoots with Hollywood to test out and try out face masks. You've heard about this, right?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah.
So this is not, and so they've been really running the idea to play on reality, make people think something isn't what it actually is. And they've been testing it through Hollywood, and the CIA have been working together to play with this idea where some real, Mission Impossible type stuff going on.
Right.
And you're like, what? And we're just now hearing about it. It's all over. And so, but right now in this particular moment, it seems like the very nature of what's real and what isn't real is being challenged higher than it's ever been challenged before. And if we're going to live lives through these screens, I mean, you can get yourself an AI avatar that looks like you. Right now, I could have texted this all out with you and put it on in a text and written your conversation and my conversation. And the AI is so good that hardly anybody will know the difference.
Right. If you really, you have to actually know somebody to know that they're not AI.
But who do we know? Who do we know anymore? We don't know anybody that well anymore.
I mean, I think it's where this is where the church has a huge open door opportunity for real relationships, real community, that because all the other ways that we get, I mean, a lot of the other ways that we get community are breaking down. You still have like youth sports and some places that provide this kind of in-person, caring community, but a lot of the, you don't have people signing up for the Moose Lodge in the next generation, right? You don't have a lot of the fraternal organizations are just disappearing. But the church has an opportunity to step in and I think teach people how to have community and teach people how to be hospitable, that sort of thing.
So I'm still trying to work this out, and you can just toss this aside. But right now, so the reason I'm bringing this up is I'm trying to work through this because I think I want to talk about this even on Cross Politic today, is when the nature of reality is actually up for grabs, when you go to vote for a president or a congressman, I mean, I guess in one sense, that's not a new thing. We've always had a hard time knowing what is real. But it feels like that the challenge for that is higher than it's ever been before. J.D. Vance is weird, is their best move right now. Waltz is lying. He never actually went to war. Joe Biden is fake. We just went through that one. He's not real. His audio call was AI generated. They got an AI to do we have no touch points for reality. And the problem is like that sounds all fine and cool until you actually have to make a decision.
Yeah.
And so it's not just the AI. I think AI is the illustration that we are under strong delusion, a judgment of strong delusion. When you can't judge what's real, I feel like, who was it that went to battle? It was Gideon's army, right? And so you got Gideon's. Go ahead.
Where the enemy was got so confused they started killing themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
The delusion. And I was trying to figure out like what's another touch point in history that might help us think through some of the lack of reality or the delusion that we're under. Like we can't judge what's real or not. Right. We have no idea. It's worse than getting a text message from. So if I'm on my phone, it happens with my kids. I say, hey, babe, I love you. And she texts back, I love you too. Can I have some ice cream? Wait a second. Who is this? My wife doesn't have to ask because I know her, right? But my kids have her phone, and there was no way for me to know that before I texted her. And now with the way that the images are, I don't know. I was telling my wife when I was looking at some of these images, I was like, guys are about to fall in love like her. They're about to fall in love with somebody that does not exist, some ones and zeros, and they're going to be heartbroken.
Right. Well, and you think of all those young dudes that see some girl and they think, oh man, that girl's amazing. And then turns out it's a dude. They're never going after a girl again. Right. That's this is why I think the church has such a huge opportunity, because if you can say, well, we know who the guys and the girls are here. Like, this is a place where we're going to know who the guys and the girls are. This is that we, this person has 45 people here who've known them since they were little. Right. So I can guarantee the reality of this relationship. I think it's such a huge opportunity that but the church has to have a real community. You can't fake real community. But as the rest of the world loses touch with reality, the word and sacrament and life of the church can become touch points with reality in a way that they haven't needed to always be, because people had other options in other communities.
So are we about to go back and become more tribal then? Because it seems like we're in the moment where this only happens. This only happens. I'm thinking of tribe, nation, empire, right?
Yeah.
As the empire breaks down, the nation, and it usually is the thing that people run to fix it, which is probably why we got a whole bunch of nationalism running around everywhere on both sides. Everybody's running to the nation to fix everything. But then what you just said, though, is actually, was that what would the church be considered? A nation tribe?
Well, this is where the church has always been at a separate institution, right? It's a new humanity
that lives in the nation, tribe, empire.
So it's existed in a healthy way amongst tribes, amongst nations, amongst empires, and Eugene Rosenstock Hussey explains the cycle from tribe to nation to empire, then to the collapse of the empire, back to the tribe, to the nation, to the empire.
Would you do that? Would you work through that?
Yeah. So Eugene Rosenstock Hussey, he writes about it in a couple of places. He's got some good essays on it, but he also explains it in his book Out of Revolution, that humanity goes through cycles of being tribal, right? Finding its identity in its blood relationships, right? Tribal identity, and then it grows into a nation, which finds its relationship by means of space and language. This is where we're in this space together. We speak the same language, and the language has embedded in it all of the understandings of the law and all of the things like that common culture.
We've talked about that.
We've talked about that.
Alfred was a good example of that.
Right. And so he took tribes and was able to knit them together into a nation with a common enemy, and there's things like that. Well, then it moves into empire, where you've got multiple nations held together by means of a eschatological vision. Really, that is what an empire brings. And so you have the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, and the millennial vision. Our term millennial the millennium comes from the promise of Rome, right? That it was going to bring in world peace, a millennium in the future, by means of the spread of the Pax Romana and bringing everybody under the Roman, the Roman authority, right? That when you had a shared law, because of the ability to enforce, then you could bring in world peace, right? So that was the imperial promise. Well, and then that obviously failed. It did provide us with a lot of the language about what it means to be a King of Kings and a Lord of Lords, and that Jesus says, no, the emperor isn't the emperor. I'm the emperor, right? He takes all authority in heaven and on earth to himself. Well, but then in a worldly sense, worldly empires fail, right? They when people stop believing in the eschatological vision. Did we forget to start recording?
No, I have the audio recording.
Okay, good.
I hit that earlier, and I don't know why it didn't take, but it showed up and then it didn't. But go ahead.
So you have when people stop believing in the empire, right? Believing the eschatological promises of the empire, which in America it was making the world safe for democracy. That was our imperial shift into American empire. That was the eschatological promise. Eugene Rosenstock Hussey called it the crusade of the Star-Spangled Banner, right? That we shifted into imperial mode between the world wars. So before that, America was a nation, right? It had founding principles that held us together. It had a language and a common culture, and people could come in and join the culture. It usually took a generation or two, but there was a way to come in and join the nation by taking on the culture. But once you become an empire, you no longer have to take on the founding vision because there's an eschatological vision that's provided, right? So you shift from tribe, where you get your identity from your relationships, to nation, where you get your identity from your founding principles, your common story, to a empire, where you get your identity from a common future, from a
hopeful
commonly
future.
believed in future. Yeah. So, but then that fails. In the worldly empires all fail, and you move back to a tribe, right? So you have, and this is why a lot of the people even calling themselves nationalists are actually acting in tribal ways, right? They're I think this is just kind of the normal cycles of history, of the way that mankind mankind not trusting in, well, when mankind trusts in something other than Christ and it fails him, right? So when you can't sing "I'm proud to be an American" and get everybody in the audience to cry anymore, right? You used to be able to do that. You can't you have something like Mormonism is a family based, it's an eternal family type of religion, right? So it's a tribal based religion, and it's growing right now. Really, it's growing really fast. It's a lot of people are saying, oh man, Mormonism provides me with that tribal identity. And I think we're going to see more of that. We've got the tribalism of people getting hold of, well, I'm getting hold of a small group and taking their identity in it, and this is something that's, I think, you have in every phase, but right now people's political affiliation is treated much more like a tribe, where the people outside the tribe are not as human as us, right? Our humanity is derived from our membership in this tribe. We're in the right group, and that's what makes us fully human. It's a corporate justification. But then some of the current, the current tribes are really anti-human, right? So communism is an anti-human movement, right? It's destructive to humanity. It's destructive to civilization. It's always eaten up and destroyed civilization in favor of gathering power for the elite. So communism does that. Historically, what the historic fascism by its historic definition does that. The word fascism has changed meanings, but fascism as an economic system is dehumanizing, right? So you have all of these moves.
Wait. So when you say fascism, what do you mean by fascism? Like, just define that.
Yeah. So the economic, the economic system of fascism, where corporations and the government come together and form. So instead of capitalism, where the family is the economic unit, in fascism, you have a small number of corporations, which are the economic unit, working in concert with the coercive political authority, and the combination of a group of corporations with the coercive authority, and the ability to tax, the coercive authority of the state. When those two combined, that was fascism historically. It was an economic system. Now there's all sorts of things that get called fascism that really aren't fascism by that definition, but the word has just shifted its meaning. We don't have two separate names for it. So now, I was talking to some, I was at a preaching outside of a Planned Parenthood down in California, and these kids all, dressed as punk kids, punk rock kids, came up, and they were, blowing smoke in our face and being obnoxious and making a circle around the preacher. When I was done preaching, I said, "Hey guys, come over here. I've got a question for you." And they all came over here, and I was like, "What are you guys doing here? Like, why are you here? Why are you just bored? Like, is there nothing else to do?" And one guy was like, "Yeah, we were wandering around and we saw a group of people and thought, let's go cause problems." Like, they had no convictions about what they were doing, but they were bored. And I said, "Well, why is it that you think it's okay to attack us?" He said, and one of them said, "Because you're fascists." And I said, "Can anybody give me a definition of fascism?" And everybody looked around, and one of them was like, "It's like people that tell other people what to do."
You mean like you're doing right now?
Yeah, it's like, that's wrong. That's not actually a definition of fascism. And one of the other guys said, "I think it's maybe an economic theory." And I was like, "Yeah, it's an economic theory." Exactly. And so we talked about what fascism really was, and I told him about it. And he was like, "Wait, like George Bush?" I was like, "Yeah, like George Bush and Bill Clinton." And they were like, "Wait, so you're saying Democrats and Republicans are both fascists?" I was like, "Yeah, exactly. Yeah."
You're getting it.
They're working
You're smarter than what you look.
And one of them looked at me and was like, "Yeah, but you wear a tie, so I can't trust you." And because I was wearing a tie. And I was like, "What are you talking about, man? Chicks dig ties." I was like, "Do you even know how to tie a tie?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "Well, let me teach you. Come over here." And so now I've got this like punk kid sitting in front of me like he's my son, and I'm teaching him how to tie a tie. I could take my tie off, teaching him how to tie a tie. And next thing you know, we're sitting there and we're having a good conversation. Just, "Tell me about your life. Tell me." And later, because they had been causing such a ruckus, the police had been called. After I'd talked to them for about 40 minutes, and then I was like, "So you guys want to just head off?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're just gonna go." I was like, "All right, see you guys." And we finished our protest, one of the police officers came over and was like, "Thank you so much for that. We really thought there was going to be violence." And I was like, "Yeah,
it could have been.
It could have been, yeah." But they were just a bunch of young dudes that didn't have older brothers or dads, or and that just needed. They just needed to be enjoyed by an older male, right? Like that's what young men want is they want older men that are patient with them and are enjoyed by them, right? Like their strength is seen as valuable and all of that. So but their definition of fascism is, I think, what most people see and or hear when they hear the word fascism. It's people that like to tell others what to do, and this is why I think fascism is the name. Well, there's a one of the early American communists said that the word fascism has a smell about it that we want to attach to capitalists. Right, we want to attach the smell of that word, and so we're every chance you get, call our enemies fascists, because of the word that the smell that the word has. So I think they actually are purposefully trying to use the word to control their enemies. And unfortunately, what happens is you always have those people on the right that are like, "Oh, if you're going to call me a fascist long enough, then hail Hitler,"
Yeah. You when you were talking about tribe nations and empires, you said that the empire gathers around a future eschatological idea, right? Sorry for the double, but it's an eschatological idea that gathers an empire. And so then your identity really doesn't have to be the thing that you gather around. Whereas in a nation, you gather around your ideas, the things that
your common story, your founding ideals, right? This is why, in order to shift America to an empire, they have to retell the story of America, right?
That's why after, and you think World War I, World War II, the post-war consensus, that's when the real new storytelling began.
Right. Yeah. So you retell the story in such a way that an American empire starts to make sense, right? So so you get the stories of Manifest Destiny becoming central to the founding of America. So rather than the stories of freedom, the stories of being oppressed by an empire and a small group becoming finding their freedom to self-rule and non-intervention and all, you start getting the stories of Manifest Destiny becoming founding stories, central stories to who we are, right? You get stories of the Civil War, I think, as a refounding of America. FDR was famous for slipping Abraham Lincoln quotes into his speeches. He was, would reference the second founding of America, right? And shifting, and FDR also. So that's the time that so the actual father of the constitutional republic, George Washington, he served he served twice as president and then walked away. Right. You didn't have to have a law that you couldn't serve more than 2 times, because everybody said our founding father in his wisdom didn't serve more than 2. And so I won't. Right. That our founding story as a nation guided the morals. And so if somebody would have run again, everybody would have said, "What is wrong with you?
Like,
we're Americans.
Yeah, we vote for you anyway." Right. Exactly.
And then you have the shift to
you know what? They would have said, "Who do you think you are, a king?" Right.
Right. Exactly.
That would have been their story, because that's exactly what they just came out of. Okay.
Right.
Got it.
And until you have FDR come along and run again. right after the shift or during the shift into an imperial version of America, you have FDR come along and run again and run for more. And so then they have to make a law that a term limit, a law limiting a president to 2 terms. Right before, you didn't have to make a law because of we were focused on the founding story, and that gave us our identity as a people. And all three of these can have a good version and a bad version. It's not as if one of these is the ideal and we always have to get to it. It's always, there are good things and bad things about each of these. But when you have to make a law that the president doesn't get to act like a king, you have shifted the identity of the people, right?
So what was the last thing for the tribes? What binds the tribes together? So we know empires, it's the eschatological that binds them together. For the nation, it's their ideas and common stories that bind them together. What is binding tribes together?
It's the blood relationship, it's the direct relationships, right? So and a tribe is going to have its basically it gives a definition of what it means to be us, what it means to be human. These are the things that we do together. These are the things that we value, right? So tattoos are come out of that tribal mindset because you would mark your flesh with your tribal identity because flesh was the thing that bound us.
Brand almost, right?
Brand, yeah. And so now, you have this sort of shift and change, and the tattoos coming back with a vengeance.
Yeah. Is this also
as a way of marking your identity? Tattoos still function that way.
Yep.
It's just now you've had the complete breakdown of a trust in a biological or identity marker, and so now the tattoos connect you across. You connect you where you're not they connect your flesh to one another in a way that the biology doesn't do anymore because of the influence of Christianity. But
yeah, I was going to say the same thing. So that's actually what covenant was supposed to do, right? So baptism and covenant, those things were identity markers to mark us out. Now, do those still work differently inside of so you got those, you talked earlier that the church is kind of over all of these, a separate institution outside of all of these. So then there is a kind of glue that holds a tribe together. There is a type of glue that holds a nation together. Where does a church fit at in this structure? Because here's what I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to get to the whole reason we're at this point in the conversation is because we're talking about how we understand the very nature of reality. When the nature of reality is falling apart, we can't identify even from an image anymore what's real or what's fake. We can't look at a person on the street and know if it's a guy or a girl. We can't trust a tax code because it's like, well, what do they really want? None of the bills, all of our bills are all gay, right? They don't produce any human flourishing. They're just there, and it's destroying humans. Like there's no part of reality right now that in the world that we're living in that we can trust and say this is good. This creates human flourishing, right? We're all confused. And yet we still have to make decisions. And your argument is the only way you can really, in this current time, understand the reality is through the church. And the church,
I think the local church is our anchor to reality when the rest of the world crumbles.
Okay, I want to work through that more, but I want to know how the church works in this tribe nation empire. Is it the kind of is everything underneath the umbrella of that? Is it in the mortar of that? How does that work inside?
Yeah. Well, so it works in that it is a universal institution, right? It's not under any of the other institutions. It has everything that a tribe has. It has everything that a nation has, and it has everything that an empire has in itself. So when the so a really good example of this is when the church would go to the tribes. One of the things that people would say is, well, my tribe is my family. It is my it's my civic order, and it's my religion. So if I change religions, I lose my civic order and I lose my family. Right? You have something really similar in Islamic countries right now, right? When somebody is going to. What do you mean?
If you change your religion, then you've broken covenant.
That is true in a tribal setting, right? In an empire, you can convert. I mean, if it's a religious empire like the Roman Empire, it didn't work this way. Right. But in the American Empire, somebody grows up not a Christian, becomes a Christian. It really doesn't change that much, right? Think of all of the people that converted to Islam in the 90s and the early 2000s. In New York, right? You had like almost an Islamic revival in New York in the late 90s. Well, it didn't change their citizenship at all.
Right. Yeah. I'm questioning if it should have.
Oh, I know that people are having these discussions now, though, because of the failure of the empire.
I'll let you finish, because I think because we start talking about reality, and that gets real, right? Like that touches down. Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Right. But it's when the civic order is an empire, there's space for lots of religions, right? That's part of what an empire brings, and it makes conversion possible. This is Paul's able to travel around the Roman Empire converting people because of the imperial order.
Jason, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Now we got to. Okay, so see, I thought you were going to talk about people are listening to this and they're like, okay, let you finish the structure. But I have to. So are you telling me though that nations themselves, because don't nations make up empires?
When an empire is functioning properly, you have a series of nations.
Right.
When it goes to seed, the nations are dissolved into a single empire.
When it goes
into a singularity. When it goes to seed, yeah. So
what do you mean by seed?
So when it begins to crumble, right? When people stop. So the British Empire, it starts off with 3 nations, and the British Empire is formed, and the Spanish Armada tries to, because Queen Elizabeth, because the Roman Catholics tried to assassinate Queen Elizabeth, so she arrests her cousin.
What does she do?
She arrests her cousin, who's the Roman Catholic that they were trying to install, right? And then a bunch of people also go out and round up Roman Catholics, right? So some of which had committed crimes, some of which hadn't. But it caused the Spanish to send an armada to say, hey, those are our people, because they're Roman Catholics and we're a Roman Catholic nation.
Right.
And so because nations can have and really need to have a single religion that's dominant. You can have room for other religions if they submit to their position within a nation, if you're going to have peace. But the British Armada, which was smaller but smarter and technologically more advanced than the much larger, more dominant Spanish Armada, they defeat the Spanish Armada. And what that does is it begins shifting the mindset. Queen Elizabeth is one of the greatest rulers that God gave to the English-speaking people. And one of the reasons that made her great is she would stand up and say, I understand that I'm a woman and I have the weak frame of a woman, right? So she embraced her her role as a woman and her femininity in her rule, and say, so here is what I cannot do, and how I need you as my generals to step up and do this, because I cannot as a woman under God's order. And then she was just brilliant, great public speaker, and had the kind of understanding of the civic structure that she was an incredible ruler. Well, but what happened is, because of that defeat of the Spanish Armada, when Queen Elizabeth dies, you have this realization among the British that we are now the strongest in the Atlantic. And they were right? They were. And so they begin expanding the British Empire. And so you begin adding nations to it. And it goes well for some of those nations. A lot of those nations, it goes really well to be added to the British Empire, because their sovereignty is respected. And they but they get the added benefit of the trade routes of the British Empire. Yeah. They get the added benefits of the common law system.
So the empire made the trains run on time, so economics could flourish.
Yeah, so economics could flourish, but when the British Empire goes to seed, you start losing that national sovereignty in favor of an imperial on the ground sovereignty, right? So, and that has always happened. I think it will always happen, because I do think that empires begin thinking of themselves as challenge to Jesus's imperial rule, right? He is the King of Kings, and empires fail because they begin to think of themselves as a challenge to.
Well, isn't it too that they're not thinking like Alfred? Alfred absolutely knew that if he was going to be an empire, that he had to actually have one religion, right?
Right. Yeah. That you couldn't. Well, he was forming a nation.
He wasn't trying to form an empire. Right.
He wasn't trying to form an empire. Yeah. That's the thing, is the English were actually anti-imperialists for a long time, and I think that's the reason the British Empire worked so well, is because they distrusted their own imperial authority for longer than most empires do.
That's funny. That's what Doug says about America too. One of the things that made America great is that they knew that America wasn't great. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. That there's really that anti-imperialist mindset came to America through the British common law theory, common law history. And that's one of the reasons that even the American empire lasted as long as it did. Right. And there were imperialistic impulses from the start. Thomas Jefferson buying the Louisiana Purchase was, I think, an example of some imperialistic impulses that are just there when you win a big war. When you get power, you have this tendency to want to consolidate and expand. But it took a long time. It was Abraham Lincoln was the one who really said, no, we're going to act like an empire. Now, if I'm remembering right, the North didn't fire the first shots, right? I think at Fort Sumter, the South fired the first shots.
But it depends on who you ask.
But it justified the imperialism, the shift to an empire, right? So that mindset of, no, we are... it's not the United States as an adjective united. The United States becomes a noun, right? So you have the first real move legally towards an empire, right? You have the arrest of Democrats in the North. You have
rightly so. Oh, I'm sorry. It just came out. Right. I don't know where it came from.
Right. So you have the shift of the meaning of the word republic. So you have to really mean a single unit, right? The federal government takes on a whole new role at that point. Now, it doesn't become the way the people think until the world wars, right? That's when the shift in the people happens. But you have this legal shift towards an imperialistic mindset at the Civil War, right? So it's a different view of America comes out of the Civil War. But but now we're at the failing end of the American empire, right? We're at the point where people don't believe in the project, and it doesn't actually matter who you ask.
That's right. That's right.
The left and the right, what they agree on is that America has failed.
Yep, that's exactly right.
What they disagree on is what to do next, what to do to the failure, what to do to a failed place and position, and I think it is actually. It is actually a lot more complex than the rhetoric of either side, wants to just say, well, here, we could fix it real easy. I think we're in the middle of an incredibly complex worldwide shift because of we're post communication revolution, right? Now you have connected the whole world communication wise. And so the shifts and the changes affect the whole world in a way that they didn't before. So, so I don't think anybody's actually figured out how to solve the problem. I hope that World War III is a Cold War. I think we're actually in the beginning of a cold World War III, and hopefully it never doesn't become hot. In my hopes and dreams, it stays a Cold War. But we are there. I mean, it doesn't help that I think this is why the throwing so much support behind Ukraine is a bad idea. I think that this is that's where things could become a hot war, is if the United Nations decides to attack Russia, to protect its interests in the Ukraine, that sort of thing.
So one of the things you said when we started talking was that the nation, tribe, empire, who was it? Whose idea was it? I thought it was James Jordan, but he's working off of somebody else's idea.
Eugene Rosenstock Huessy.
Okay.
He's basically one of the guys. Yeah, he's one of the inventors of sociology, or what we think of as sociology.
And so he's picked up on the cycles of tribe, nation, empire. And right. It seems in the cycles of kind of how they operate and how they function. And I sent you the other day, I think it maybe a couple of weeks ago, this video about the fourth turnings. Right?
Yeah.
And so I want to watch this with you if you don't mind. And I just kind of want to get your take on it, because I think that we're kind of going through, it feels like we're going through this cycle.
History repeats itself in 80-year blocks called saeculum, but we'll just call them history blocks. Not exactly 80 years. This is history, not math, but roughly the span of a human lifetime, maybe 80 to 90 years. Within these 80-year history blocks, we have 4 turnings of around 20 years each. We usually call them generations. This book calls them turnings. Turnings are sort of like seasons, like spring, summer, fall, winter. Throughout our history, we've had these 80-year blocks, and the 80-year blocks have been remarkably similar to each other. We're in one now. The first turning, the first season, is a high, an upbeat era. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era. And the fourth turning, well, sorry, but fourth turnings suck. The fourth turning is a crisis. And
can I just say that this feels very much like conversations you and I have had already, where,
right.
And I'm going to take it and put it into the context of the calendar, where we have this, the way that the planets move and they dance, and there's these cycles that are built inside of the very nature of humanity that right. kind of goes spring, summer, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, right? And then you start all over again. And that seems like what they're saying is like you have this high, which is kind of the beginning of something being birthed. Oh, wow, we're coming to life. And then this awakening. consciousness of who you are, maturing, and then this unraveling, I can really screw stuff up. And then because of that unraveling, you have a crisis.
Right.
Because the unraveling has to come to its completion. And then after that, you have death and resurrection. It starts all over again. That's how I'm understanding this. Is that fair?
I think so. I mean, I think that's what he's arguing for. Yeah. And the original author that this guy's referencing, he pulls from ancient historians who have talked about this sort of thing, and as well as the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, a whole series of historians put theories like this together. Eugene Rosenstock Huessy was on the American receiving end of those theories, and he developed his idea of the tribe nation empire in conversation with those historians. And then Carl Jung also developed his theories in conversation with those British historians as well. So some of them, like Carl Jung, is incredibly influential still to this day. He was reading the guys talking about this stuff. So the Fourth Turning guy, he does a really good job of putting it all together.
Okay, I'm going to keep going here.
An era of upheaval. We're in a fourth turning right now. During a high, the getting is good.
Wait, do you think we're in a fourth turning right now?
I do, although I have some of my ideas of my own about some of these things, but yes.
Okay, hold on. I want to get through this. I want to hear your idea.
We had the most even distribution of wealth during our high. You could work at a gas station and afford to buy a house. This high is the period that the MAGA hats refer to. We got Hank Williams and Elvis and Little Richard and the birth of rock and roll. We launched monkeys and men into space. This is when the Mustangs and Corvettes first came out. Our high ended with the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. The high is not a high for everyone, of course. America still had a segregated South. Homosexuality was illegal and considered a mental disorder. The high is a period of conformity, the age of nonconformity, and of social justice begins during the Awakening, our passionate era. During the Awakening, we had Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, acid, Vietnam protests and Vietnam itself, the Women's Liberation Movement, Stonewall and the Gay Rights Movement, great movies, great music. This is when the first Macintosh computer came out. The Awakening is a time of increasing individualism. This second turning, this awakening, ended with the re-election of Ronald Reagan in 1984. Things get messy during the third turning. During the unraveling, we got the fall of Soviet communism and the beginning of the Russian gangster state. The greatest musicians of the time sang about violence and decay in their deteriorating cities. The LA riots, OJ, the bombing of Bosnia, and the Columbine high school shootings on the same day. September 11th, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Our unraveling ended with the financial crisis of 2008. 80 years ago, in the last fourth turning, America had her Great Depression, then World War II. 80 years before that, the Civil War. 80 years before that, the Revolutionary War. Each generation's archetype is the characteristic that will define the generation in its prime, in midlife. The boomer archetype is the prophet. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs are boomers and prophets. Both predicted that one day everyone, not just big corporations and governments, would own a computer. Gates even predicted a crisis like COVID-19 5 years beforehand. The writers of this book are boomers and prophets.
Well, he probably started it. Just to be fair. All right.
Gen X
funded it.
Funded it. Fair enough.
The nomad generation. The quintessential Gen Xer, Elon Musk, builds things that move us from one place to another. Rockets, electric cars, hyperloops, nomadic devices. But the millennials, raised during the unraveling, will emerge as the hero generation during this crisis.
No!
These are the Parkland High students, the frontline hospital workers, and Malala Yousafzai.
That's our heroes. That's our heroes.
But this is, they're too close to it to get the details right on some of this, because this is still predictive.
Yeah.
The book says millennials will be the World War II heroes of our history block.
No! No! Why?
We don't know what Gen Z will do, but they will be an artist generation. From them will emerge the next Bill Withers, Toni Morrison, or Bob Dylan, all born during the last crisis, all from an artist generation. The history block before ours ended with World War II and began with the Civil War, 80 years prior. The history block before that ended with the Civil War and began with the end of the Revolutionary War, 80 years prior. Every 80 years or so, something big comes along and changes everything. And now, we're at the end of our history block.
Okay. That's fascinating to me. That's extremely fascinating. All right, so your take on that in the tribe nation empire setup, and then we have to tie that into the breakdown of reality.
Yeah. So in the ancient world, you had these cycles of that were, they're cycles of 4, but they overlap, so they add up to 7. Right. So you have what they call weeks of years. Right?
Cycles of 4 that add up to 7.
Yeah, because you have the overlap of the last and the first. And so this understanding of a cyclical view, this isn't new. This is when you're in the middle of an empire phase, empires depend upon a linear view of history that is moving someplace, because eschatology is at the heart of imperialism, right? So there's this, the cyclical view has to go away for an empire to make promises about changing the future, about controlling the future, right? So if a cyclical view of history, you can have a tribe with a cyclical view, you can even have a nation with a cyclical view, but an empire has to get rid of it. And so when you're in an imperial view, you lose this cyclical understanding. We're coming out of an imperial view, and so the cyclical view is coming back in really hardcore. Well, the question, though, in a cyclical view is, if this is the case, is there any way out of it? Am I
or
am I a pawn? Is there any freedom? Do my actions mean anything?
I mean, maybe that's the thing. I think it's finally giving people a framework to hold on to act.
Right. It can do that, right? But what historically what happens is tribes get connected to a cyclical view like this, and then they go cold, right? And because they say, well, history just repeats itself. It's just cycles. There's really no way out. And the word for it so the fate and the fatedness of history becomes a real problem in the psyche of people. And this is exactly what the church ran into with the tribes, was they believed so heavily in fate that they actually wouldn't make any decisions.
It's like hyper-Calvinism.
It is. It's a sort of hyper-Calvinism. So the Stoics were the response to a failing empire. The Stoics said they believed in the eternal cause and effect of in history that was uncontrolled and uncontrollable by the individual. There was a mindless fate that didn't care one way or other about humanity. And so the Stoics, they rise right as the Roman Empire begins to crumble as a response to the fatedness of a return to the cyclical understanding out, because the empire didn't work. You have Sophocles at the end of the Hellenistic Empire show up saying, "What if fate hates us?" Right? What if fate is inescapable and it hates us? Right? It's the grinding the grinding stone of fate. when the empire fails, they say, oh, this is what happens. Empires fail because fate hates us, because the gods hate us, because the gods don't care about us. They're stronger than us. Fate is stronger than us, doesn't care about us. And it comes back in, and the English term for it was the wheel of fortune, or the wheel of fate, or the wheel. And it, sometimes you're at the top, sometimes you're at the bottom, but it rolls along. And Chaucer actually references this regularly, because he talks about piety as the way out of the wheel of fortune's grasp. Now, you couldn't necessarily get off of it, in the sense that if you're at the top, then the as things move forward, you're most likely going to end up at the bottom. But he said, if we understand that, then when we're at the top, we'll treat the people at the bottom the way, as representatives of Christ, and as images of God. And because we know that at some point those people at the bottom are going to be at the top again, right? And the wheel of fortune was more of an economic reality than a spiritual type of reality, or a civic, reality for a people group. But they believed that there were cycles, but the cycles were not weren't making decisions on your behalf, the way Sophocles, the way the Stoics, and the way the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes and all believed when they first got to the tribes, as well as the Germanic tribes, the Icelandic tribes. They all had this deep view of fate, and it was making decisions about your life for you. You didn't have control. The Anglo-Saxon word for it is weird, W-Y-R-D, weird. And so a lot of the early poets, what they did was they actually talked about Christ defeating fate, that Christ at the cross defeated fate, because the fate of all mankind is death. And when he came back, when he died on the cross, he killed death. He took the world out of the hands of fate. And now, as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, his imperial reign over the world frees the world from the cold hands of fate, right? So his resurrection left fate in the grave. And now, when we worship the Lord, fate no longer can hold us. It doesn't grip us. It doesn't hold us anymore. And we can actually make it out of that. So a big part of the fourth turning mentality, or understanding of the fourth turning, is that each generation disconnects itself from the previous generation and opposes it, right? The generation gap is a fundamental doctrine in the fourth turning philosophy, the philosophy of the fourth turning. So for the hero a generation to produce the prophet generation has to stand against the hero generation. For the artist generation to arise, it has to stand. No, the artist generation has to stand against the hero generation. The prophet generation has to stand against the artist generation. And then the I can't remember what the other generation. And then whatever the fourth generation, it stands against the artist generation, right? The generation gap is fundamentally necessary in this view of history. The generation gap was fundamentally necessary to Sophocles' understanding, right? The Stoics believed in the generation gap. Christians don't believe in the necessity of a generation gap, right? So our way out of this understanding of fate is to return, is what Malachi prophesies in the returning of the hearts of the children to the fathers, and the fathers to the children, right? That's the way out of the cyclical destruction of everything that really did show back up with modernism, right? It really does show back this cyclical view, this cyclical happening shows back up when modernism takes over, when Christianity is jettisoned, we basically fall back into these cycles of generational rivalry. And it's unavoidable, right? Because only Christ can return the hearts of the children to the fathers and the hearts of the fathers to the children. Our only way out of a fated cycle is to return to Jesus, right? But we can see that our culture not returned to Jesus is going through cycles like this, and it can help us say, well, what can we expect? Right? What humans, being humans, act in humanish ways, and the humanish way of responding to your fathers when you are outside, when you're not following Christ, is to stand up and turn around and oppose them, right? And so we can make economic decisions accordingly, marketing decisions accordingly. Our businesses really can profit from understanding this sort of stuff, and we can understand and know what to expect our children's temptations are going to be, being in the generation that they're in, and how to help and guide and them, knowing that they are going to think differently than us. But that's a blessing and a benefit when the strength of young men is connected to the wisdom of old men, and it's a society, civilization destroying thing when it's disconnected. I mean, that's why you even see in there when he says, one of the great benefits of the generational rivalry has been the homosexuality being legalized and celebrated. You think, no, that's one of the things that happens when you have boys grow up disconnected and from their fathers, dominated by their mothers, that sort of thing.
It's funny because what he considered to be awakening was actually falling. Like, that was a turning away. That was a falling away. And it's funny because there's a couple things I was just observing. I kind of got lost in something I want to talk about in a second. But I first want to connect. Doesn't it seem like Israel kind of went through these things as well when it came time for cycles of judgment? Like, there's a generation who knew the Lord, and then there was their kids who kind of knew the Lord, and then there was a generation who didn't know the Lord at all. And then they went through kind of all these, and then they repented, the generation after repented, and then they come back, they know the Lord, and there's these same kind of cycles that you see as you read through the Old Testament. And so that cycle that we're going through kind of feels familiar, because if you look at when the greatest, the thing that our generation is looking back to in their closest memory is a very rich humanism where, like he said, not everybody was, you still have black people weren't able to vote. I don't know how people forget about that. It's like, it was just 50, 60 years ago, guys, that we didn't have a chance to vote. Black people couldn't vote in America. Everybody's forgotten that. I mean, I guess if you can forget that President Trump was shot in the face just a few weeks ago, I guess you're going to forget 60 years ago. So it makes sense to me. But I mean, there really was, we seem to have this longing for, we seem to have known the Lord better in this time than we do now. Right. And there was evidence of that. And then, so people keep wanting to go. So I understand that. But doesn't that, there seems to be some reality to these shifts, but maybe not in the way that they're describing it. Because you're right, they don't have the timelines right as far as what's good and what's bad. And so that's one thing. So hold that over there for a second. It was amazing in this last moment watching you deny a worldview being shunned on you, and then you saying, wait a second, what is the nature of reality according to the scripture? How does God really make the world? And then reframing everything around that. And it was funny because I'm like, all the stuff that we've talked about, I saw you exercise right now where you go back and you said the nature of reality is based on what God says it is. Here's how the world functions and flows. And however the world is seeing this, they're catching up on hints of reality, but they're completely blowing the whole narrative of reality. And in order to be able to, that's the kind of framework I think we need to be able to have, because I think Christians are looking for something else outside of Scripture to be able to give them handlebars on how to react to reality. And when I think like that, and I see Christians thinking like that, it's because the very center point of reality should be the Lord's table. It should be like from there, everything and the preaching and the liturgy of the church, because of that reality, our cycles are all screwed up because we don't even have the Lord's Supper every week. We don't have that type of liturgy in our churches every week. We don't have that understanding because there's no repentance anywhere in this narrative. Right? As you were talking, I was thinking of like, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, then we'll hear from heaven and heal their land. Well, if you got a land that's broken and it needs to be healed, it's really simple. You need to repent. Right? That's what it is. But it was really interesting that the fight, I think you proved that the fight is over who gets to tell the story. Right?
Yep.
And if we have settled Christ gets to tell the story, God gets to tell the story, then we don't have to be bound to everybody else's concepts and loops of reality. And so then we don't have to live as prisoners in that, oh man, we're going through another cycle. What are we going to do? Okay, this is that. It's like, well, hold on a second. Like you have an understanding of the world. Why are you buying into somebody else's?
Right. And I think a big part of it is because the two gentlemen that wrote The Fourth Turning are incredibly well educated.
Yeah.
And it's intimidating to read because they bring so much understanding of history to bear, as well as a really deep understanding of archetype theory. And so I get why you read it and say, well, they're on to something, because I think they are actually on to something, right? They're not actually fully wrong, but the assumptions that they bring with the and they say in the beginning of the book, we don't believe these things are automatic, because they actually say that the Civil War, they actually argue that the Civil War didn't produce a hero archetype, and I think it actually did, and we're tearing down the statues to try and say that it didn't. We put up a lot of statues of Civil War heroes.
Stonewall Jackson.
And I think Stonewall Jackson, but I think even Abraham Lincoln,
yeah,
he fulfills the hero archetype. But they, the assassination of Lincoln throws a wrench into the spokes of their theory, because I think if Lincoln had lived long enough, then he would have been able to fulfill that hero archetype.
Well, but he has lived longer because of his assassination than
I think
MLK does. They mark out MLK as being a hero archetype, or should I say, the end of that awakening.
The end. So they mark him out as the voice.
Yeah.
That leads the awakening, and I think that's actually a legitimate. When you think of him archetypally, I actually do think that he fulfills in the imagination, the corporate imagination of America, he fulfills that role. And I think what conservatives don't understand when they say, but he wasn't that guy in his personal life, they don't understand how that actually doesn't matter for the thing that he fulfills in the imagination of people.
They understand with Trump.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they can't avoid it, but right. They're trying, because it does actually work that way. We need those stories. Somebody will hold that role in our imagination. I think this is why church history is so important, and having and actually reading biographies of great men is important. And that's an aside, but what the Fourth Turning gets right, I think we can learn and say, oh no, there is something to that 20 to 23 year, 20 to 25 year groups of people that tell the same stories about themselves, that generations. It's much stronger in an empire, that the generations hold together much more clearly in an empire. And I think that's one of the reasons why post-Enlightenment. The Enlightenment really returns us to these kind of fourth turnings. You don't have the same kind of straightforward four turnings in previous to the Enlightenment, but in some of that is because the Enlightenment enshrines the generation gap. By calling themselves the Enlightenment, they're implying and saying that the previous generations were dark, right? And so you have the re-enshrinement of the generation gap. You have Oedipus's parents trying to kill Oedipus because he's a rival again, right? You have and then Oedipus killing his own father in response to the fates. The fate when fate rules, children kill their parents unless they're killed by their parents, right? Whether it's in reality or metaphorically, that's what you end up with.
Why?
Because fate rests on a limited resource metaphysic.
And so in order for me to survive, I have to kill you.
I have to kill you.
That's exactly what the narrative is inside of the abortion world, which is, I just saw them ask J.D. Vance this. There is a woman who was pregnant, and in order for her to potentially have more kids and for her and her husband to have a future, she has to choose on whether or not she can have an abortion right now and destroy the kid that she has in her womb, because it might, if she has this child, it might limit her from ever having kids again. So in order for her to live, she has to kill this baby. And that's the setup that they give you, is like, here goes your options. That's fate, right? It's like, okay,
right.
In order for you to live, boy, that's brutal. But what's the real option?
I mean, the real option, what you do is you say, thou shalt not murder. Right. So we don't make moral decisions based on a simple, moral decisions aren't a math problem that you say, well, what are the ends going to be, and then justify the means that way, right? We say, well, this person's, we've got an eternal soul here made in the image of God. I am a mother. What do I do based on what am and what I'm for?
I lay my life down for my child, right?
Like, for my child,
what
right?
in the world are we thinking?
I am a father. I protect the child that I have. I don't think it's not a math game where I say, well, if this one's gone, I can end up with more. We're not, people aren't replaceable cogs like that. I mean, this is, I think, one of the most profound moments in the book of Job is when he gets everything back double, but he gets the same number of children because his children still live in heaven. Right. So he doesn't get, he has 7 children that are gone, and then he says now he gets everything back double, and then he only gets 7 children. So he lost $100,000, he gets $200,000. He lost 100 sheep, he gets 200 sheep. He lost 7 children, he gets 7 children, because he didn't lose the other 7 children, because they're eternal and they are living in heaven. So he gets 7 more, and he has 14, double. Yeah. Right? It's this. Right. It's a profound metaphysical statement that God is making about the eternal nature of our children. It's beautiful. There's
so much there just to think of. Like, it did upset me that the question was framed that way, but it also upset me that I think people sympathize with, like, oh, what if she can't have any more kids? What if this is, God gives them this kid and that's enough? Right. Like, if that's what God does to the womb, as if you don't have that kind of control anyway. You don't have that kind of control anyway. So what happened to being like, you got to have these stories so built in your head. Abraham and Sarah, God opened up the womb when they were in old age. And this is the man and this is the woman who becomes the father of the nations.
Right.
Like, but you're right. We don't play. That's so good. That's a really good point. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, and I think the thing that we forget too is smog was brought down by a single arrow. You God you get one kid, but you might get Alexander the Great, right? We don't live in a limited economy, in a limited economic world, or in a limited resources world, where we say I need 7 kids to have influence on the future, right? One kid is eternal. You don't have you have, mathematically speaking, one children is as infinite an influence on the future as 7 children, right? Because they live forever, right? That you don't have. I mean, and I'm not saying, don't have as many kids as you can and all that. I love kids, and
you're gonna be a grandpa soon.
Here. I'm excited. You married off my first daughter last week, and just it's been. But you don't. I think we have so imbibed a rivalry based, limited resources based metaphysic that we, unless we fight against it, we're going to see our kids as rivals.
Okay. There's so much more to talk on that, but we kind of reached this little limit where I think we should stop. But before we do, I want to go back to the beginning. We can't trust our eyes anymore. We can't trust the news anymore. We can't trust our institutions anymore. Reality is, after COVID, I think it was really good for us, because COVID, everybody's kind of over COVID. I'm not over the whole thing that went down. I am not over that. I am still living in 2020 in March, because the shock for me was, oh my goodness, they did this publicly. They showed their hand, and everybody is kind of moving past it because they don't have to wear a mask anymore. And I'm like, yo, the snake is still crawling around in the garden, right? The snake got up there and did a little thing and spit a little venom, and everybody's like, well, okay, the snake's not here no more. No. It's like a spider in my house. I'm going to tell you right now, if I see a spider in my house, it's the size of my hand, and that joker runs around and jumps on my TV, and I didn't find it to kill it, I'm not sleeping in the house. Matter of fact, I'm burning the whole thing down. I'm burning everything, the whole land. I'm putting gasoline around the border of the land. I'm lighting the whole thing on fire. We ain't doing that. And so that's been a little extra. But I'm just saying, that's exactly the moment we're in. Everybody's like, well, we don't see the spider on TV anymore. Let's keep watching TV. Like, it's running around here somewhere. What's wrong with y'all? It's down here having millions of babies everywhere. We're going to get overrun by spiders. What y'all doing? Shut the TV off and burn the house down. I'm being extra. But
did I tell you about the mouse in my office last week?
No.
Oh man, I've been at war with these mice. I have traps all over. I mean, but I came into my office. I heard like a weird noise right in my office, and so I opened the door. And what had happened was a mouse. They won't eat out of my traps and get caught, but one ran past and got his tail stuck in a trap. And so he was dragging the mouse trap around my office. And so I opened it and I was like, I need coffee before I'm going to deal with that. So I just closed the door to my office. And then I went and got the dog, and I was like, come on, let's go take care of this thing. The dog looked in and he ran and hid with the little punk. I was really upset. I was like, you're a mouser. I'm trying to train you as a mouser. And he's like, nope, I'm not dealing with that thing.
That's your mouse.
It's your mouse. And so I closed the door and I went and made coffee and then drank a little bit. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go get this mouse. But I opened the door and it wasn't making the noise anymore.
It got away.
And I was like, it's either found a place to hide or it got into the walls somehow with that trap still attached or something. Anyway, it had tried to pull itself behind a bookshelf and gotten jammed, right? So it couldn't get out. And then I was like, so I could just wait it out. But I didn't, obviously. I grabbed it, took it outside, took care of it. But I was looking at it and I was like, it's stuck. I could win by just leaving it there, but then you get the smell and that's exactly what I think we're doing with the whole code thing. We're like, well, it's stuck at the moment. It's not moving around anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's what you think.
You think, but then you're just waiting for it to start to smell.
Well, that's, the problem with it for me is, it's got friends, right? It ain't coming here by itself. It's got friends. So now we know the direction in which all his friends are, and y'all just want to leave it. Yeah, no. This is why I think the spider one is like, this spider's coming back.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I ain't doing spiders. But so then if all of reality is absolutely, I don't know what it is. I can see a picture today and think it's a real person. I could see a fake deep state Joe Biden. All this stuff is fun and games until, like with COVID, like they told us a bunch of lies and we believed it. I think the way that technology is now, and I like the fact that we actually are engaged and have the ability to use it as a weapon and all that stuff. I'm totally fine with that. But I think it's a bigger narrative, which is nobody knows what's real anymore. And I don't think, most people don't think that's a problem. And because if nothing is real, then I can do whatever I want. It's almost like a form of atheism. Well, if there is no truth, if there is no God, if there is no judgment, if there is no reality, then I'm a brain somewhere in a vat and I can do and say whatever I want and it has no consequences. And so to me, it's not even about I can't trust the images in front of my head. It's about that these images are a tell of what reality has actually become, which is nobody knows what truth is. Nobody knows what's real. Nobody knows what's fake. And so now we can pontificate and make all kinds of lies or theories or whatever. And it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And I think about crypto. Like, what is it? How do we, money, inflation, like, how do people even trade on value anymore? What is it? It's whatever I say it is. Is it though? Right? And so you have to have something that is going to, I'm with you on the church. I completely agree with you, everything there. You got to have the churches, like we know what a man and woman is. I've been knowing these guys for 2 generations. We have that. But then when you start branching outside of that into how you live in the world, how is the church going to then affect how you live in the world if you can't judge what's real and what's fake anymore?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, I do think that we'll develop tools to understand what's true and what's not true alongside it. Right.
Well, can I tell you my answer to that? Is that I think the people who are, this is the self-defeating principle to me, which is the people who are making things that almost look real but aren't real, they don't have a touch on reality either. So then they're not going to communicate in a way that's real. So then there's always going to be like, I didn't trust that. Right? It's going to be inherent. It's like, because that's just, no. Right? But I think it's going to come with a group of people who have a handle on history and education. So an educated person is going to be in some way a barometer on what's real. So I saw a video the other day where it was Eminem and Tupac who were talking about the Olympics in 2024. Right?
Okay.
And I was like, well, I know that didn't happen because I'm a historian of those moments. I know what they rapped about. I know what they talked about. They never said anything like that, even though it sounded like them. But even I knew it wasn't them because I know their phraseology. I know how they rap. I know what they like to rap about. I know how they talk. So then there was nothing that convinced me that they would ever do anything like that. So I didn't believe it, right? So
right.
There's a certain form of but as that education becomes degraded, most people aren't going to be able to decide that.
Yeah. Well, I had a really interesting interaction with ChatGPT recently where I asked it to summarize a book that I knew. And I said, actually, what I said is, can you give me a summary of the chapters of this book? Because I couldn't remember which chapter had the thing in it, it was easier than flipping through the book, and it gave me a summary, and it was wrong, and I knew it was wrong because I'd read the book, and I said, "Do you have access to that book, or did you make those summaries up?" And ChatGPT responded, "I created those summaries based on other knowledge I had of other books, but I don't have access to that book." So I just said, "Please never make anything up again."
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, just like, can I train it to not do that anymore?
Yeah.
Just tell me if you don't have access to the book, right? And it said, "Okay, I will do that in the future." And I was like, if I hadn't known, I would have walked away with summaries that were just literally fake, made up summaries based on a bunch of other books. But the whole point of this book was that it was C.S. Lewis's introduction to John Milton.
Can I just say though too that just so everybody knows, that's not a ChatGPT problem. That's a human problem. It's pulling from other people who created summaries that were wrong about the book. So
it was pulling from summaries of other books about the same topic.
Yeah.
Right.
That's part of it, sure. And some of the other books that have written summaries about it too. So it's pulling all of it together and trying to filter those things out to come up with a summary of what it thinks towards basically however you ask the question. And that's what it got, which is exactly what people do.
All the time. Yeah. It's a tool. It's a derivative tool. And I think when you know what it is, you can use it well. What was interesting though, is if I didn't have the education, then I'm easily fooled. Right. And I think the recovery of a Christian humanism, because right now, and I think I've talked about this before, I think in 4 categories, right? Of people. You've got Christian humanism and secular humanism. And then you've got secular anti-humanism and you've got Christian anti-humanism, right? You have, and in a lot of ways, the Christian humanist and the secular humanist have things in common that they don't have in common with the Christian anti-humanist. And the Christian anti-humanists are, I mean, you've seen throughout different times in history, like there was a big, what was called Christian socialist movement in the late 1800s, right?
That's impossible.
But they saw they were basically, the Christians that were living always in response. And when this movement came along called socialism that also was responding to the things that they didn't like, they went along because of think of where do you go for conservative news that is not just a response to the left? Right? Why do we not have a days since we've seen Joe Biden alive counter somewhere? Right? Why don't we have that? Because conservatives don't do their own news. They just respond. They don't send out journalists, they don't do all their own research. They just live in response. When a conservative does do their own research, the conservatives and Christians go after them with tooth and nail and try to destroy them. So I get why we don't. But the conservatives in name only. I don't know. Is there a word for that? Chinos.
Liars.
But we don't do when you have a group of people that has decided that just simply living in response is good enough, right? That you are just as anti-human, anti-civilization as the people that you're in conversation with, right? You're not building anything. You're not building institutions. You're not building the future. You are complaining that other people are tearing down civilization, right? And that's what a lot of the conservative movement is right now, is just people complaining that civilization is being destroyed. But then you have a secular humanist come along like Elon Musk and say, let's build a future, right? Well, he's a secularist. And so he'll, if God surrounds him with some good Christians and he's trying to build, you may end up with some really good things built, but he believes in the future of humanity. He believes it's good to be human and it's good to protect life. But he's a futurist, so he's got some really weird views about some other things. But the anti-humanist Christians are not. I mean, a lot of it, I think, comes out of the dispensational self-destructive mindset, right? You've got this we're not unless we're the ones building the future, we are not going to be able to recognize reality, right? If we are working at understanding the past, understanding the previous, where we are in the great conversation, if we're working at building the future, then when we come across these things, I think we're going to have a lot more wisdom.
That's a really good point, Jason. I don't think that should be overlooked. If we're not working to build the future, it's going to be very unrecognizable. That's really, really a strong point.
And we don't need an empire to build the future, because we've already got Christ's imperial rule and reign of reality. So we have an eschatology. So we don't need an empire to provide us with one. So we can be in tribes building the future. We can be in nations building the future. We can be a part of empires building the future, because we've got the future that Christ's promised to us.
Can we make empires Christian?
Well, I think if we're in an empire, that's what we should be trying to do.
Because we already are under the empire rule of Christ. So all the other empire kings need to, bend the knee. So I don't think we have an option.
Yeah, because that's Christians. The church is a converting institution. It goes around converting everything it runs into.
Everything. Yeah. But this is what I think is missed inside of the conversation. It's converting everything to Christian, right? It's converting everything to the garden city. It's it's not just converting people to the garden. It's not just converting people to Christ, but in everything, it has an eschatology. Like, that's what I think people miss that. And then they make the church disconnected from reality. So then it's not the thing that's driving the nature of reality anymore, right? And which means you have another empire above the empire. Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's in conflict with reality. And that's the biggest thing. I kept thinking about Romans 1. When you give up the idea of who man is supposed to submit to and who he's supposed to worship, reality becomes very much broken. And you go, you lose your sanity, your grip on reality. Real worship trains your mind into the nature of reality, right? And if you lose real worship, then you don't know what's real, and you lose your very nature, because what we understand our nature through what we worship.
Right. Well, that's why Romans 1 makes thankfulness the hinge point.
Yes.
Right? Because thankfulness receives reality as a gift and says, since I got this from the Lord, I should ask him or learn how to use it from him. Right. Whereas if we're not thankful, we use things against their nature, right? We use our body against its nature. And that's the phrasing that is used in Romans 1, is they
chose not to give thanks.
They chose not to give thanks, and then they go against their nature, right? Well, and this is why I think Machiavelli and the Enlightenment Project, all of it is, how can we get power over nature, power to define nature, what things are, even the shifting and the changing of the word nature to a new definition, I think is an example of this, right? So we, instead of receiving reality as a gift from God, we say, how can I get power over it and be the one who, and so I don't have to say thank you to God for it anymore, because I have made this into what it is. And I mean, I think that's what socialism is, right? So instead of receiving civilization as a gift, you say, I'm going to burn this place down, and something even better that we're going to form and be in charge of. Any sort of controlled economy, right, turns into a hellhole, because we actually are refusing to receive the way the economic structure of reality works and live according to it, right? We're opposing nature by trying to control large scale economies, and these are all a Machiavellian nihilistic metaphysic underneath. But what that is a refusal to say thank you for reality as we find it, right? Is to say, well, if we can get enough power, we can change reality into what we want it to be. And what we see in Romans 1 is it just doesn't work. I mean, you actually just melt the place down and lose everything, right? Anything you worship instead of Christ, you will crush, right? It can't hold the hopes of humanity on it. If it's a created thing, you need an uncreated God to hold the hopes of humanity. And Romans 1 just is that in nutshell form.